Let's start the book, A Christmas Carol. Introduction, a timeless tale of awakening. In a world often consumed by the relentless pursuit of wealth and personal gain, Charles Dickens presents a transformative journey that challenges the very foundation of how we measure a successful life. This narrative is not merely a ghost story or a festive holiday fable, but a profound exploration of human redemption, the heavy chains of our past decisions, and the enduring power of compassion. By holding a supernatural mirror to a hardened heart, the story reveals that it is never too late to change our course, offering a deeply emotional reminder that our true business in this world is humanity itself. Point 1. The frozen soul of a miser. We all occasionally encounter individuals whose hearts seem entirely closed off to the warmth of the world, but few can rival the chilling, deliberate isolation of our protagonist. Ebenezer Scrooge is a man who has allowed the pursuit of financial accumulation to completely extinguish the fire of human connection within his soul. To understand his journey, we must first look closely at the fortress of ice he has constructed around himself over decades of rigid, unforgiving business practices. Scrooge is not merely stingy, he is a manifestation of the cold itself. His physical appearance perfectly mirrors his internal landscape. His nose is pointed, his cheeks shriveled, his gait stiff, his eyes red, and his thin lips are permanently set in a tight blue line. When he speaks, his voice is shrewd and grating. The external weather of Victorian London, biting, frosty, and thick with a dense brown fog, has no effect on him whatsoever, simply because the frost within his own chest is far more severe. People on the street know instinctively to avoid him. No beggars ask him for a coin, no children ask him for the time, and even the guide dogs of blind men seem to pull their owners into doorways when they see him approaching. Scrooge relishes this isolation. He prefers to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. On one particularly bleak and biting Christmas Eve, this internal and external coldness is on full display in the gloomy counting house of Scrooge and Marley. His business partner, Jacob Marley, has been dead for exactly 7 years. Scrooge, of course, never mourned the loss. He even proved to be an excellent man of business on the very day of Marley's funeral, securing a bargain while finalizing the burial arrangements. Inside the office, the atmosphere is suffocatingly oppressive. While Scrooge keeps a very small fire for himself, the fire belonging to his clerk, Bob Cratchit, is so pitifully small that it looks like a single piece of coal. Bob sits in a dismal little cell, shivering in his white comforter, trying desperately to warm himself at the candle because Scrooge has locked the coal box in his own office. The threat of termination hangs silently in the air, forcing Bob to endure the freezing temperatures without complaint. The profound tragedy of Scrooge's existence is highlighted by the sudden arrival of his nephew, Fred. Bursting through the heavy door, Fred brings with him a rush of physical and emotional warmth. His face is glowing from the cold walk, his eyes sparkle, and his breath smokes in the freezing air. Fred represents everything Scrooge has rejected: optimism, family, and the joyful spirit of the season. He cheerfully wishes his uncle a Merry Christmas, only to be met with Scrooge's infamous, venomous reply, "Bah, humbug." Scrooge genuinely cannot comprehend why Fred, who is relatively poor, has any right to be merry. In Scrooge's strictly transactional view of the world, joy is a commodity that must be purchased, and poverty is a moral failing that demands misery. Fred passionately defends the season, describing it as the only time of year when men and women seem to open their shut-up hearts freely and think of people below them as fellow passengers to the grave rather than another race of creatures altogether. Scrooge's response is to dismiss his nephew completely, refusing an invitation to dinner and practically throwing him out of the office. Shortly after Fred's departure, two portly gentlemen arrive collecting charitable donations to buy meat, drink, and means of warmth for the destitute who suffer greatly during the harsh winter. This interaction exposes the most brutal, unyielding layer of Scrooge's worldview. He demands to know if the prisons and the workhouses are still in operation. When the gentleman explained that many cannot go there and many would rather die than endure those appalling conditions, Scrooge delivers a line that perfectly encapsulates his chilling apathy. He states that if they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. He refuses to give a single penny, arguing that it is not his business to understand the plight of others. His own business occupies him entirely, and that is all he needs to know. As the dense fog outside thickens to the point where the houses across the street become mere phantasms, the workday finally ends. Scrooge reluctantly grants Bob Cratchit the following day off for Christmas, treating it as an unfair penalty imposed upon his wealth, a day's wages for no work. He leaves the office, retreating into the foggy, freezing night, completely unaware that the walls he has spent a lifetime building are about to be violently dismantled. This opening portrait of Ebenezer Scrooge is crucial, for it shows us exactly how far a human soul can drift into the dark and sets the stage for the monumental effort required to pull it back into the light. Point 2. The Dragging Chains of Jacob Marley. Sometimes the past refuses to stay quietly buried, arriving instead with a heavy, inescapable weight that forces us to confront the reality of our choices. For a man like Scrooge, who has spent his entire adult life entirely focused on the tangible, the calculable, and the purely material, a disruption of his reality must be both deeply personal and profoundly terrifying. Scrooge's evening routine is a testament to his joyless existence. He takes his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, carefully reading all the newspapers and spending the rest of the evening poring over his banker's book. His home is a dark, gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of a building up a yard, a place so isolated and out of place that one might easily imagine it had run there when it was a young house, playing hide and seek with other houses, and forgotten the way out. The building formerly belonged to his deceased partner, Jacob Marley. The fog and frost hang so heavily around the black old gateway of the house that it seems as if the genius of the weather is sitting in mournful meditation on the threshold. As Scrooge approaches his door in the pitch-black night, something impossible happens. The heavy iron door knocker, which he has looked at every day for years without a second thought, suddenly alters its appearance. It is no longer a knocker, it is the face of Jacob Marley. It is not fully in shadow like the rest of the door, but glows with a dismal, livid light, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. The hair moves strangely, as if blown by hot breath, and though the eyes are wide open, they are perfectly motionless. As Scrooge stares in shock, the face transforms back into a simple door knocker. Though deeply unnerved, Scrooge's lifelong habit of rationalization immediately kicks in. He refuses to be frightened by an optical illusion. He unlocks the door, lights his candle, and walks in. Yet the atmosphere of the house has fundamentally changed. As he climbs the wide, dark staircase, he half expects to see Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. He carefully searches his rooms, checking under the bed, looking into the closets, and inspecting the heavy curtains. Finding nothing but his own dreary belongings, he double locks his door, an unusual precaution that betrays his lingering fear. Scrooge sits down in his dressing gown and nightcap before a very low fire. The fireplace is framed by old Dutch tiles depicting scenes from the scriptures, but as he stares at them, every single smooth tile suddenly transforms into the face of Jacob Marley. Desperate to regain control of his reality, Scrooge mutters his favorite word of dismissal: humbug. But the universe has decided that his time for dismissal is over. A bell in the room, an old, disused bell that connects to the highest story of the building, begins to swing. At first, it swings so softly it barely makes a sound, but soon it rings out loudly and every bell in the house joins in. The terrifying clamor lasts for only a minute, but to Scrooge, it feels like an eternity. When the bells cease, they are immediately replaced by a sound far worse, a heavy, clanking noise coming from deep down in the cellar, like someone dragging a massive chain over wine merchants' casks. The sound begins to ascend the stairs. It comes closer and closer, moving straight toward his double-locked door. Scrooge still tries to deny it, proclaiming he won't believe it. But then, an apparition passes right through the heavy oak door and stands before him. It is Jacob Marley. He looks exactly as he did in life, wearing his usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. But wrapped heavily around his waist and dragging on the floor is a massive, incredibly long chain. When Scrooge looks closely, he sees that this chain is forged of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. The ghost's body is entirely transparent. Even now, face to face with the supernatural, Scrooge attempts to fight his own senses. He argues with the ghost, suggesting that this vision is merely a product of indigestion, an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, or a fragment of an underdone potato. He tries to be witty to keep his terror at bay. In response to this mockery, the spirit raises a frightful cry and shakes its heavy chain with such a dismal and appalling noise that Scrooge is forced to grip the arms of his chair to keep from swooning. Then the ghost unties the bandage around its head, and its lower jaw drops completely down to its chest. Scrooge falls to his knees, finally broken and terrified. The ensuing conversation strikes at the very core of human existence. Scrooge asks why spirits walk the earth and why this ghost wears such a terrible chain. Marley explains the tragic truth that forms the moral center of the story. It is required of every man that his spirit should walk abroad among his fellow men and travel far and wide. If a spirit does not do this in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander through the world and witness the suffering and the joy it can no longer share or alleviate. When Scrooge asks about the chain, Marley's answer is devastating. He says, "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it." He then points out a terrifying reality for Scrooge. The chain Scrooge himself has been forging was already as heavy and long as Marley's 7 years ago, and he has labored on it continuously ever since. Scrooge's chain is now unimaginably massive. Scrooge tries to comfort his old friend, pointing out that Marley was always a good man of business. The ghost wrings its hands in anguish and delivers a passionate, heartbreaking cry, "Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." Marley reveals the purpose of his visit. He has intervened to offer Scrooge a chance at redemption, a chance to escape this eternal, agonizing fate. He warns Scrooge that he will be haunted by 3 spirits. Without their visits, Scrooge cannot hope to avoid the path Marley treads. As the ghost backs away toward the window, it beckons Scrooge to follow. Looking out into the dark, foggy night, Scrooge sees that the air is filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste and moaning piteously. Every one of them wears a chain. Scrooge recognizes many of them from his life: wealthy men, politicians, hardened businessmen. Their eternal misery stems from a singular, heartbreaking realization. They now desperately wish to intervene for good in human matters, but they have permanently lost the power to do so. As the fog rolls in and conceals the spirits, Scrooge closes the window, thoroughly exhausted by the emotional and psychological toll of the encounter. He throws himself onto his bed without undressing and instantly falls into a deep, death-like sleep. Point 3. Flickering light of Christmas past. To understand how a heart turns entirely to ice, we must journey back to the moments before the freeze began, examining the subtle and profound experiences that shape a human soul. The present is merely the accumulated weight of our history. And for Ebenezer Scrooge, unlocking his hardened exterior requires a painful excavation of his forgotten youth. Scrooge awakens abruptly in the pitch blackness of his room. The chimes of a nearby church clock are striking the quarters. He listens intently as the deep, resonant bell strikes 12, then 1. According to Marley's warning, this is the exact hour the first spirit is scheduled to arrive. A sudden flash of light illuminates the room, and the heavy curtains of his bed are drawn aside by an unseen hand. Sitting before him is a strange and contradictory figure. It possesses the proportions of a child, yet views the world through the face of an old man, its skin unwrinkled and its hair white with age. It wears a tunic of the purest white, trimmed with summer flowers, and holds a branch of fresh green holly. Most strikingly, from the crown of its head springs a clear, bright jet of light, which illuminates everything around it. Tucked under its arm is a large extinguisher cap, which it uses to hide the light when it so chooses. This is the ghost of Christmas past. The spirit's voice is remarkably soft and gentle, sounding as if it is speaking from a great distance. It introduces itself as the ghost of Scrooge's own past and commands the old miser to rise and walk with it. When the spirit grasps Scrooge's arm and moves toward the window, Scrooge panics, protesting that he is mortal and will fall. The spirit simply places a gentle hand upon Scrooge's heart, assuring him that this slight contact will be enough to uphold him. They step through the wall and instantly find themselves standing on an open country road. The heavy fog, the biting cold, and the dark filth of the city vanish completely, replaced by a crisp, clear, beautiful winter day with snow blanketing the fields. Scrooge recognizes everything. A profound wave of emotion hits him, a sudden catch in his throat, and as he looks around, a single tear falls down his cheek. The spirit notes this small but monumental reaction, pointing out the tear. They walk toward a small market town, seeing boys riding on horseback and driving carriages, shouting to each other in joyous celebration of the season. Scrooge knows them all by name. His cold heart flutters with a forgotten gladness. But as they reach a large, somewhat dilapidated brick building, his old boarding school, the joy fades. Inside a long, bare, melancholy classroom, a single boy is left completely alone, reading near a feeble fire while all the other children have gone home for the holidays. It is Scrooge himself. Watching his younger self, the adult Scrooge breaks down and weeps. The profound loneliness of his childhood, abandoned by a harsh father, is deeply moving. He sees the vivid products of his young imagination, Alibaba, Robinson Crusoe, and Friday, appearing briefly in the room, the only companions the lonely boy possessed. In a moment of striking vulnerability and regret, the adult Scrooge suddenly mutters that he wishes he had given something to the young boy singing a Christmas carol at his door the previous night. It is the first crack in his armor, the first genuine expression of empathy since the journey began. The spirit waves its hand and the scene shifts. The boy is slightly older, still at the school, walking back and forth in despair. The door suddenly opens, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, darts into the room. She throws her arms around his neck, kissing him repeatedly, and joyfully announces that she has come to bring him home. This is Fan, Scrooge's beloved younger sister. She explains that their father is much kinder now, that he spoke gently to her, and that she bravely asked him if Ebenezer could come home, to which he finally agreed. The profound love between the siblings is undeniable. The spirit gently reminds Scrooge that Fan was a delicate creature, but had a large heart. She died a woman, leaving behind one child, Scrooge's nephew, Fred. The realization of how poorly he treated Fred just hours earlier hit Scrooge with a heavy pang of guilt. The scene shifts again, transporting them to the bustling streets of a city. They enter a warehouse, and Scrooge's demeanor completely changes. He becomes incredibly animated, identifying the place as the warehouse where he was apprenticed. Sitting behind a high desk is a jovial, larger-than-life man in a Welsh wig, old Fezziwig, Scrooge's former boss. It is Christmas Eve. Fezziwig rubs his hands together, laughs a deep, hearty laugh, and commands young Scrooge and his fellow apprentice, Dick Wilkins, to clear away the desks. In mere minutes, the floor is swept, the lamps are trimmed, and a massive fire is built. A fiddler arrives, striking up a lively tune. Then comes Mrs. Fezziwig, followed by the three Miss Fezziwigs, the young men whose hearts they broke, the housemaid, the baker, the cook, and the milkman. The warehouse transforms into an exuberant, joyous dance hall. There is cake, negus, a great piece of cold roast, mince pies, and plenty of beer. Fezziwig and his wife dance with incredible energy and grace, serving as the radiant center of the celebration. When the party finally ends, Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig stand by the door, shaking hands with every single person and wishing them a Merry Christmas. The adult Scrooge, watching this scene, is completely absorbed by the memory, his heart and soul firmly back in that joyous warehouse. The spirit turns to Scrooge and casually remarks that it was a small matter for Fezziwig to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. After all, he only spent a few pounds of his mortal money. This dismissive comment triggers a passionate defense from Scrooge. He argues vehemently that a boss has the power to render the lives of his employees happy or unhappy, to make their service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. He insists that the happiness Fezziwig gave was quite as great as if it cost a fortune. He stops abruptly. The spirit asks, "What is the matter?" Scrooge, quiet and deeply reflective, looks down at the ground and says softly, "I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all." The contrast between Fezziwig's generous leadership and Scrooge's oppressive treatment of Bob Cratchit is laid bare. By confronting the joyous light of his past, Scrooge is finally beginning to recognize the suffocating darkness of his own present. Point 4. The price of gold and lost love. Greed rarely arrives all at once like a sudden storm. Instead, it creeps in slowly, an insidious frost that gradually replaces the vital pulse of love and human connection with an insatiable, paralyzing hunger for security. As the ghost of Christmas past continues to guide Scrooge through his history, we witness the tragic turning point where a man's priorities shift from the wealth of shared affection to the hollow comfort of accumulated gold. The spirit waves its hand and the lively, musical warehouse of old Fezziwig vanishes. Scrooge now sees himself in the prime of his life. His face does not yet bear the deep, harsh lines of his later years, but the transformation has clearly begun. There is an eager, greedy, restless motion in his eyes, revealing the deep-rooted passion that has taken hold of him. He is no longer the joyful apprentice. He is a man consumed by the fear of poverty and the desperate pursuit of wealth. He is sitting in a room with a beautiful young woman. This is Belle, the woman he promised to marry when they were both poor and content with their humble lot. But today her eyes are filled with tears, and she is dressed in mourning clothes. The conversation that unfolds is entirely heart-wrenching, as it represents the exact moment Scrooge actively chose his fortune over his humanity. Belle speaks with a quiet, tragic resignation. She tells him that another idol has displaced her in his heart. When Scrooge asks what idol that might be, she answers simply, "A golden one." She explains that she has watched his nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion gain has entirely engrossed him. Scrooge attempts a weak defense, claiming that he has not changed his feelings toward her, merely that he has grown wiser in the ways of the harsh world. He argues that he is only trying to secure their future against the bitter realities of poverty. But Belle sees through the rationalization. She understands that the pursuit of security has morphed into an obsession that leaves no room for anything else. She tells him that their contract is an old one, made when they were both poor and happy to be so. Now that he has changed, she knows she is no longer enough for him. She asks him directly and painfully if he would seek her out and try to win her today, knowing she has no dowry and brings no financial advantage. Scrooge remains silent. His inability to answer is the most devastating confession he could make. With immense grace and profound sorrow, Belle releases him from their engagement. She tells him that he may have pain in this memory, but that it will pass, and he will dismiss the recollection of it gladly as an unprofitable dream from which he awoke. She wishes him happiness in the life he has chosen and walks out the door, leaving him alone. And alone he would remain for the rest of his life. Watching the scene unfold again, the adult Scrooge is in agony. The pain of seeing the exact moment he threw away a life of love is unbearable. He begs the spirit to show him no more, to take him home, pleading that the spirit is torturing him. But the ghost of Christmas past is relentless, insisting that they must see one final shadow. The scene shifts to a room that is not very large or handsome, but is full of comfort and warmth. There is a beautiful young girl sitting near a roaring winter fire, whom Scrooge initially mistakes for Belle. But then he sees Belle herself, now a mature, graceful matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in the room is deafening, as the space is filled with joyous, boisterous children playing and laughing. It is a scene of chaotic, beautiful family life, the exact life Scrooge forfeited. The door opens, and the father of the family enters, accompanied by a porter carrying an immense array of Christmas toys and presents. The children swarm him, shouting with glee, tearing at his clothes to get to the packages. Eventually, the children are herded upstairs to bed, and the father sits down by the fire with Belle and their teenage daughter. The husband casually mentions to Belle that he saw an old friend of hers that afternoon. He explains that he passed by the window of Scrooge's counting house. The window was not blinded, and he could see Scrooge sitting alone inside. The husband notes that Scrooge's partner, Jacob Marley, lies upon the point of death, and there Scrooge sat, quite alone in the world, waiting for his partner to die, entirely isolated from any human comfort. This casual observation strikes Scrooge like a physical blow. To see the beautiful, loving family that could have been his, and to hear them describe his own miserable, solitary existence with such pity and detachment, shatters his remaining defenses. He screams at the spirit in a broken voice, demanding to be removed from the place. "Remove me!" Scrooge exclaims. "I cannot bear it!" In a desperate, frantic attempt to escape the crushing weight of his own regret, Scrooge turns on the spirit. He grabs the large extinguisher cap that the spirit carries and forces it down upon the spirit's head. He pushes it down with all his might, trying to extinguish the glowing light of the past. But the past cannot be so easily suppressed. Though he forces the cap down to the spirit's chin, the brilliant light continues to stream out from underneath, flooding the area with an undeniable radiance. Exhausted by the struggle and overwhelmed with a heavy, inescapable drowsiness, Scrooge barely manages to stagger back to his own bedroom. He falls heavily onto his bed and immediately sinks into a deep, dreamless sleep, completely drained by the agonizing realization of exactly what his golden idol has cost him. Point 5. The abundance of Christmas present. Joy is a peculiar thing, often found in the most abundant quantities where material wealth is scantiest and entirely absent in places overflowing with gold. When Scrooge awakens from his heavy slumber, he is about to be introduced to a form of wealth he has never understood: the rich, vibrant, and utterly contagious abundance of living fully in the present moment. Scrooge wakes in his own bed, but the room is bathed in a strange, ruddy glow. The light seems to be coming from the adjoining room. Now much more submissive and aware of the supernatural forces at play, Scrooge gets up softly and shuffles to the door of his own sitting room. As he puts his hand on the lock, a booming, joyful voice calls his name and bids him enter. He steps inside and stops in absolute astonishment. His usually bare, dreary sitting room has been completely transformed. The walls and ceiling are heavily draped in living green, holly, mistletoe, and ivy, making it look like a perfectly formed grove. The leaves reflect the light as if the room is filled with little mirrors. A mighty blaze roars up the chimney, far larger than any fire Scrooge has ever permitted. But the most spectacular sight is the staggering mountain of food piled high upon the floor, forming a kind of throne. There are plump turkeys, geese, game, heavy joints of meat, suckling pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, and immense bowls of punch that fill the room with a delicious aroma. Sitting comfortably atop this glorious feast is a majestic, joyful giant of a spirit. This is the ghost of Christmas present. He is a magnificent figure, clothed in a simple, deep green robe bordered with white fur. The garment hangs loosely, revealing a broad, bare chest and bare feet. On his head, he wears a wreath of holly set with shining icicles. His face is open and cheerful, his eyes are clear and sparkling, and his voice is joyful and resonant. In his hand, he holds a glowing torch shaped remarkably like a horn of plenty. Scrooge approaches the spirit with newfound reverence. He does not argue or resist. Instead, he humbly acknowledges that he went forth on compulsion the previous night and learned a lesson that is working within him. He asks this new spirit to conduct him wherever he chooses, ready to learn and grow. The spirit tells Scrooge to touch his robe. As Scrooge does so, the feast, the room, and the fire instantly vanish. They find themselves standing together in the bustling streets of London on Christmas morning. The weather is severe. The sky is gloomy, the streets are choked with dirty snow and half-frozen mud, and soot falls like dark snowflakes from the chimneys. Yet, despite the bleak and biting conditions, the atmosphere is incredibly cheerful. People are shoveling snow from their roofs, shouting down to one another, throwing snowballs, and laughing heartily when they hit their mark, and laughing even harder when they miss. The shops are a marvel of sensory overload. The poulterers' shops are still half open, brimming with birds. The grocers' shops are a riot of colors and smells. French plums blushing in their boxes, candied fruits, enormous pyramids of oranges and lemons, fragrant spices, and great bowls of roasted coffee. The sheer abundance of the food is described with such vivid intensity that it feels almost magical, a testament to the festive spirit that transforms ordinary commerce into a celebration of plenty. The spirit and Scrooge watch as the poorer citizens of London begin to emerge, carrying their modest Christmas dinners, mostly geese and puddings, to the baker's shops to be cooked in the large ovens. The spirit takes a profound interest in these people. He stands by the doors of the bakeries, and as the people pass by, he occasionally lifts the covers of their dishes and sprinkles a few drops of incense from his torch onto their meals. It is a very uncommon kind of torch. Whenever a brief argument breaks out among the people jostling in the crowded street, the spirit simply sheds a few drops of water from the torch onto them, and their good humor is instantly restored. They immediately realize it is a shame to quarrel on Christmas Day. Scrooge, observing this magical intervention, asks the spirit if there is a peculiar flavor in the sprinklings from his torch. The spirit confirms there is. Scrooge then asks if it applies to any kind of dinner on this day. The spirit answers, "To any kindly given, to a poor one most." When Scrooge asks why to a poor one most, the spirit delivers a profound truth that strikes at the heart of the story's moral philosophy. Because it needs it most. In this vibrant, bustling scene, Dickens contrasts the grim reality of Victorian poverty with the resilient joy of the human spirit. The Ghost of Christmas Present does not merely represent a holiday. He embodies the active, conscious choice to find joy, extend grace, and celebrate life despite the harshness of the surrounding world. He shows Scrooge that true wealth is not stored in a bank vault, but is generated in the bustling, messy, beautiful interactions of everyday people choosing to be kind to one another. Armed with this understanding, the spirit prepares to take Scrooge to a place where this philosophy is practiced with the most profound grace. Point 6. A Humble Feast and Tiny Tim. True warmth radiates brightest from those who have every earthly reason to be cold. As the ghost of Christmas present guides Scrooge through the snowy streets, they leave the bustling commercial center of London and arrive at a humble four-room house in the poorer outskirts of the city. The spirit smiles, pausing to sprinkle a generous amount of incense from his torch upon the doorway. It is the dwelling of Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit. Inside, the atmosphere is alive with chaotic, loving energy. Mrs. Cratchit, dressed in a poor, twice-turned gown, but brave in cheap ribbons, is busy laying the table. She is assisted by her daughter Belinda, while her son Peter vigorously mashes the potatoes. Two smaller Cratchits, a boy and a girl, burst into the room, excitedly announcing that they have smelled the goose cooking at the baker's outside. Despite their obvious poverty, evident in their threadbare clothes and the meager size of their home, the room is overflowing with anticipation and joy. Soon the door opens and Bob Cratchit enters. The cold weather has forced him to wrap his threadbare comforter tightly around his neck, as he cannot afford a proper coat. Perched happily upon his shoulder is his youngest son, Tiny Tim. Tim carries a small crutch, and his limbs are supported by an iron frame. He is terribly frail, yet his spirit is remarkably bright. While Mrs. Cratchit and the older children rush to get the dinner ready, Bob sits by the fire. He tells his wife how well Tiny Tim behaved in church. Bob's voice trembles slightly as he recounts how Tim told him that he hoped the people in church saw him, because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember upon Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see. This profound, gentle optimism from a child in such physical distress strikes an incredibly deep chord in Scrooge's heart. The dinner itself is a masterpiece of making the most of very little. The goose is brought in, and the family treats it as if it were the rarest, most magnificent bird in existence. It is, in reality, quite small for a family of their size, eked out with heaps of applesauce and mashed potatoes, but no one mentions this. They eat with immense gratitude. Then comes the pudding. Mrs. Cratchit is terrified it might not be done properly, or that it might break, or that someone might have stolen it while it was boiling in the washhouse copper. But when she brings it in, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy and adorned with a sprig of holly, it is hailed as a triumph. After dinner, the family gathers around the modest fire. Bob mixes a hot beverage in a jug, and they raise their glasses. Bob offers a toast. "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us." Tiny Tim, sitting very close to his father's side, echoes the sentiment with his famous, enduring line, "God bless us, everyone." Watching this scene, Scrooge is overcome with an emotion he has not felt in decades: genuine concern for another human being. He looks at Tiny Tim's frail form and desperately asks the spirit, "Tell me if Tiny Tim will live." The spirit's answer is grave. He says that if the shadows remain unaltered by the future, he sees a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. When Scrooge pleads that the boy must be spared, the spirit turns Scrooge's own cruel words against him. If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge hangs his head, overcome with penitence and grief, deeply ashamed of his former callousness. The family's celebration continues, and Bob proposes another toast to Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. Mrs. Cratchit bristles at the name, calling Scrooge an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man, and stating she would only drink to his health for the sake of the day and for Bob. They drink the toast, but the mention of Scrooge's name casts a temporary, dark shadow over the room, proving just how oppressive his existence is to those under his power. Yet, the shadow quickly passes, and the family returns to their cheerful stories and songs. The spirit then takes Scrooge on a rapid journey across the world. They visit a bleak, desolate moor where miners live in mud and stone huts, yet are singing Christmas songs around a glowing fire. They visit a solitary lighthouse battered by the raging sea, where two men sit by a fire wishing each other a Merry Christmas. They visit a ship far out in the dark ocean, where the sailors hum Christmas tunes and think of home. The message is clear. Joy and human connection can penetrate the darkest, most isolated corners of the earth. Finally, they arrive at a bright, warm, beautifully lit room. It is the home of Scrooge's nephew, Fred. A wonderful party is underway. Fred is laughing uproariously, recounting to his wife and friends how Scrooge responded to his Christmas greeting with, "Bah, humbug!" The guests laugh at Scrooge's expense, but Fred's tone is one of pity, not malice. He states that Scrooge's wealth is of no use to him because he doesn't do any good with it, and that Scrooge's offenses carry their own punishment. Fred resolves to keep inviting him every year, hoping that one day the old man's heart might soften. The party plays music and engages in lively parlor games. In a game called Yes and No, Fred thinks of a subject and the guests have to guess it. It must be an animal, a disagreeable animal, a savage animal, an animal that grunts and growls, lives in London, and walks the streets. The guests guess a bear, a bull, a tiger, before finally guessing the correct answer, Uncle Scrooge. Despite the mockery, Scrooge is so caught up in the joy of the games that he unconsciously begs the spirit to let him stay until the guests depart. As the night wanes, the spirit ages visibly, his hair turning gray. He explains that his life upon this globe is very brief, ending at midnight. As the chimes prepare to strike, Scrooge notices something strange protruding from beneath the spirit's robes. The spirit opens his garment to reveal two terrifying, ragged, wretched children, a boy and a girl. They are yellow, meager, scowling, and wolfish. Scrooge steps back in horror, asking if they are the spirit's children. The spirit replies that they are man's. The boy is ignorance, and the girl is want. The spirit warns Scrooge to beware them both, but most of all to beware the boy, for upon his brow is written doom, unless the writing be erased. When Scrooge desperately asks if they have no refuge or resource, the spirit once again throws Scrooge's own awful words back at him. Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses? The clock strikes 12. The ghost of Christmas present vanishes, and as Scrooge looks about him, he sees a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming toward him like a mist along the ground. Point 7. The silent shadow of what approaches. The most terrifying truths are often the ones presented to us without a single spoken word. The ghosts of the past and present communicated through dialogue, emotion, and vibrant scenes, but the final spirit relies entirely on the chilling silence of inevitability. The ghost of Christmas yet to come approaches Scrooge slowly and silently. It is draped in a deep black garment that conceals its head, its face, its form, and leaves nothing visible except one outstretched, pointing hand. The very air around the spirit seems to scatter gloom and mystery. It does not speak, nor does it move its heavy folds. This profound silence fills Scrooge with a creeping, paralyzing dread. Scrooge addresses the phantom, acknowledging that he is about to be shown shadows of things that have not happened, but will happen in the time before them. He admits that he fears this spirit more than any other, but because he knows the spirit's purpose is to do him good, and because he is desperately anxious to become a better man, he is prepared to bear the company and follow the pointing hand. The spirit guides him into the heart of the city, specifically to the exchange, where wealthy businessmen gather. Scrooge sees a small group of men he knows well, men of wealth and influence. He listens to their conversation. They are casually discussing a man who has recently died. One man yawns and asks what the dead man has done with his money. Another replies indifferently that he probably left it to his company, noting that it's likely to be a very cheap funeral because he doesn't know of a single person who would attend it. They laugh and move on to other business. Scrooge is utterly bewildered, wondering who this wretched, unmourned man could be. The scene shifts abruptly to a dark, obscure, and deeply impoverished part of town that Scrooge has never visited. The streets are foul and narrow, filled with the stench of dirt and misery. They enter a low-browed, rag-and-bone shop, a place where iron, old rags, bottles, and bones are bought and sold. An old rascal named Joe sits smoking his pipe. Suddenly, three people arrive at the shop simultaneously: a charwoman, a laundress, and an undertaker's man. They are startled to see each other, but quickly burst into laughter. They have all come to sell items they have stolen from a dead man's house. As they unpack their bundles, the sheer callousness of their actions becomes horrifyingly clear. The undertaker's man has stolen a seal, a pencil case, and a few buttons. The laundress has taken sheets and towels. But the charwoman brings the most shocking items. She opens her bundle to reveal the heavy bed curtains, complete with rings, which she took down while the dead man was still lying in the bed. Even worse, she produces a fine linen shirt. She explains that the undertaker had dressed the corpse in this fine shirt to be buried in, but she thought it a waste. So she stripped it entirely off the dead body and replaced it with a cheap calico one. The thieves justify their actions by stating that the man was a wicked, hard, and isolated miser in life. If he wanted to keep his things after he was dead, he should have been more natural in his lifetime and had someone to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of gasping out his last breath entirely alone. Scrooge listens to this transaction in absolute horror. He realizes that this could be his own fate, that this is how the world treats those who treat it with contempt. The spirit points its dark hand, and the scene changes again. They are now in a dark, empty room. On a bare bed, devoid of curtains or comfort, lies the body of a man covered by a ragged sheet. The room is utterly silent. There is no one to mourn, no one to watch over the body, no one to shed a single tear. The spirit points firmly at the head of the corpse. Scrooge knows that he only needs to lift the sheet to see the man's face, but a paralyzing fear prevents him. He realizes deep in his soul the terrifying truth, but he refuses to acknowledge it. Desperate to escape the oppressive silence of the dead room, Scrooge begs the spirit to show him someone, anyone, who feels some emotion caused by this man's death. The spirit takes him to the home of a young, impoverished couple. The husband returns home looking anxious but relieved. He tells his wife that their merciless creditor is dead. The only emotion connected to this man's death is a profound, overwhelming sense of relief and joy. Scrooge is devastated. He begs the spirit to show him some tenderness connected with the death, to erase the dark stain of what he has just witnessed. The phantom conducts him back to the humble dwelling of Bob Cratchit. The atmosphere in the house is vastly different from the joyful Christmas dinner they witnessed earlier. It is quiet, incredibly quiet. Mrs. Cratchit and the girls are sewing, their eyes red from crying. Peter is reading aloud from the Bible. The terrible truth hangs heavy in the air. Tiny Tim has died. Bob Cratchit returns home from work. His step is slower, his shoulders bowed. The family gathers around him, trying to offer comfort. Bob speaks softly of the beautiful green place where Tim is to be buried. He breaks down in tears, crying out for his little child. He retreats upstairs to a room brightly lit and decorated with Christmas greenery, where Tim's body lies. Bob kisses the little face, composes himself, and returns downstairs. He makes his family promise that they will never forget Tiny Tim, and that they will never quarrel among themselves. For doing so would dishonor the sweet, gentle memory of the boy. The profound love and devastating grief of the Cratchit family stand in stark, brutal contrast to the unwept, unmourned corpse on the bare bed. Scrooge realizes his time with the spirit is drawing to a close. He demands to know the identity of the dead man who was so despised. The spirit does not answer, but points onward. They travel to a churchyard. It is a neglected, overgrown, gloomy place, choked with weeds and grass, symbolizing a life devoid of love. The spirit stands among the graves and points down at one specific headstone. Trembling violently, Scrooge creeps toward it. He reads the name carved upon the neglected stone: Ebenezer Scrooge. The terrible realization crashes over him. He is the dead man. He is the one whose death brought relief, whose belongings were stolen from his warm corpse, who died entirely alone. In an explosion of absolute desperation, Scrooge falls to his knees. He grabs the spirit's dark robe, pleading for his life. He screams that he is not the man he was, that he will not be the man he must have been without these visits. He vows to honor Christmas in his heart and try to keep it all the year, to live in the past, the present, and the future. As he holds up his hands in a frantic, agonizing prayer to have his fate reversed, he notices a change in the phantom's hood and dress. The spirit trembles, shrinks, collapses, and dwindles down into a bedpost. Point 8. The conclusion. Scrooge woke to find himself clutching his own bedpost. The curtains were not torn down. The room was his own, and best of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. He scrambled out of bed, laughing and crying in the same breath, his face glowing with a frantic, newfound joy. He was as light as a feather, as happy as an angel, and as giddy as a drunken man. Running to the window, he called out to a boy in Sunday clothes, "What's today, my fine fellow?" "Today?" replied the boy. "Why, Christmas Day!" Scrooge was ecstatic. The spirits had done it all in one night. He immediately sent the boy to buy the prize turkey from the corner shop, the big one that was the size of a small child, and had it sent anonymously to Bob Cratchit's house. He dressed himself in his finest clothes and walked out into the streets, beaming at every passer-by with such a genuine smile that 3 or 4 good-humored fellows said, "Good morning, sir. A Merry Christmas to you." He sought out the portly gentleman who had asked for a donation the day before and promised a sum so large it left the man breathless, including years of back payments. He finally summoned the courage to visit his nephew Fred's house. When he knocked on the door and asked if he might come in for dinner, the welcome he received was so warm and sincere that it nearly broke his heart. He played games, ate wonderful food, and was happier than he had ever dreamed possible. The next morning, Scrooge was early at the office, hoping to catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. When Bob arrived 18.5 minutes behind schedule, Scrooge feigned his old growling persona. But just as Bob began to apologize, Scrooge stepped forward with a wide grin. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," he shouted, clapping him on the back. "I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family." Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more. To Tiny Tim, who did not die, he became a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh and little heeded them. His own heart was always laughing, and that was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but lived upon the total abstinence principle ever after, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us and all of us. And so, as Tiny